Hi, it's Anna Mason, and in this video I wanted to show you how I layered up watercolour to create this realistic looking feather. I worked from a photo and began with a pencil drawing of the outline of the feather, as well as the central rachis and a few of the more prominent barbs. From there, as I always do, I began painting the lightest colours I could see within the feather, which you can see here. With a very pale grey wash, I used a small brush for plenty of control and applied the paint in the direction of the barbs, coming out from the central rachis. This way, if I got overlaps, they'd create lines that would help to create the look of the barbs. I painted this pale colour as a layer over the whole feather, but once this was dry, I wanted to identify those lightest parts, so I applied another really pale layer everywhere except those highlights. It's subtle, but I could now identify those lightest parts and make sure I didn't paint into them in the next stages. With that dry, I used my tiny brush and a thick, almost black paint mix and went straight in to paint the darkest areas of the feather along that central rachis and some of the lines between barbs at the tip of the feather. When that had dried, I used a slightly bigger brush to apply a mix that was darker than the first one I used, but lots more watery and therefore paler than the one I was just using. I was concentrating on applying it to the next darkest areas, the ones that you can see here. But I didn't want to go too dark with my mix because so much of the dark colour to these areas comes from the tiny lines of the barbs, and at this stage I was focusing on the colour between those lines. I used the tip of the brush to apply in lines where I saw them, and filled in the central rachis in the middle and as a darker strip to the bottom towards the end. Once that was dry, I added a watery wash of a more brown colour to reflect the hint of colour I could see in the photo. Next, I used a mix that was halfway between my original super watery one and the one I was just using to paint the mid-tones to the feather. These had a slightly more purple hue to them, so I added a touch of cobalt violet to my grey mix. Again, unless I was painting along an edge, I applied the paint in the direction of the barbs to help create the impression of those lines. With that layer dry, it was time to start the balancing act of getting all the little lines for the barbs painted whilst getting the overall tone or value right for the feather. I used a darker, thicker mix that was a bit lighter than the darkest one I'd used before, and with the tiny brush I applied lots of the darker lines I could see, watering my mix down as I worked into lighter areas of the feather. Next, I returned to darken up the midtones again using a fairly watery mix and the larger brush to darken broader areas. Now I was really getting into the tonal adjustments phase where, having darkened up the mid-tone parts of the feather again, including the gaps between the barbs, I could see that the darkest barbs and rachis needed to be darkened some more, so I did that now, as usual, onto dry paint underneath so that I could create precise lines with the tiny brush. With the barbs darkened, I needed to bring the lighter areas next to them into balance by darkening those again with the larger brush and a paler mix. The lines underneath needed to be totally dry and I needed to use a light touch so I didn't cause those details to bleed and be lost. I then used a more watery mix and the tiny brush to add further details in the form of little lines and occasional little patches. And finally the feather was finished. This is the same technique I use, although on a smaller scale, when I paint feathers on a bird like this swan. A video class of these feathers is available now in my online school. If you've enjoyed this tip video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'd love it if you'd share this video with your friends. And if you'd like to take one of my tried and tested video classes for free, hop over to annamasonart.com where you can find even more resources to help you pick up your brush and paint the way you've always wanted to. But remember, you won't improve your painting unless you make the time to paint. So be sure to schedule in some me time this week and paint something that you love. And if you need help with that, my website also has plenty of tips to help you make painting a priority. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with another tip for creating watercolours with wow.